think we shifted into gear. All right. And see who we have here today. So you are here, you have arrived. This is Shifting the Gear, Emerging Genres and UA Approaches in Mobile Gaming. And I'm your host for this webinar, but it's not really a webinar. I'd say it's more like a talk show. We're going to talk shop. And let me give you a bit of an idea what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be covering, right? Because the whole idea is that shift happens, some of it like ATT, right? It tested marketers' mettle. Some change is liberating and it exposes new areas of opportunity, real tangible growth. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on the positive because that is where we want to be focusing on. That's where we can get better outcomes and where you also have to be realistic and capitalize on these trends. It requires a lot of new ways of mixing monetization models, smart approaches, subgenres, subcomponents of gameplay. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the ways you can take advantage of these trends with our panel of experts. They're going to share their perspectives and, importantly, prescriptive advice around three emerging trends that we have identified that are coming on strong that you need to know about because they impact UA at all levels. So I'm here, I'm host, moderator, Peggy and Salz, working with Pocket Gamer, working with Forbes, and also watching the market and the developments. And yeah, I'm going to introduce everyone. Maybe just raise your hand when I call you out. We'll start with Jochen Gary. Jochen, yeah, VP of Marketing at Stillfront. And it's there that Jochen leads a team of marketing, data, and tech experts. They collaborate with studios to drive UA for their games. He himself has analyzed dozens of games, worked with industry leaders like Good Game Studios and Candy Writer. And he's not just an expert, he is also a person you need to know. His colleagues say that he's the person you need to know in the industry. And more importantly, they say he's also just a great guy. So it's great to have you, Jochen.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Piyush Mishra, there we go. Head of Growth Marketing at Product Madness. Piyush is an experienced marketing leader with a proven record in UA and UA at scale. 7 years experience in UA and growth. He's also deeply involved in technical aspects of marketing, including attribution, for which he's very well known and has a podcast as well. He's also a traveler and a filmmaker. And I guess you could say, yeah, we're lined up. We're ready here for an adventure with you, Piyush, exploring emerging trends with you today. Welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Peggy. Thanks.
Absolutely. And Faheem Saiyad, he's director at AppSamurai. You've been with AppSamurai actually since its inception, so that's a while. Of course, AppSamurai, a VC-backed ad tech platform enabling mobile games to reach their growth goals. And there he leads the business division at AppSamurai, done various keynote sessions around the world, and he's taken out the time to be with us here today. Faheem, great to have you as well.
Thank you, Peggy. It's an honor to be here. Excited for this one.
This is a good one. This is a good round. That's what I have seen all over social. And one of the reasons I think Naveen possibly has a fan club. So we have Naveen Mewani. He is VP of Growth at Homa Games. Naveen, yes. 6 years in mobile from AppLove and Lion Studios. Been there, done that. He has a computer science major, but began his career in the banking world at Morgan Stanley in New York. And a little personal fact, if you see him without a cold brew coffee and he doesn't have one, you have to ask him if he's okay. So I have to ask you, Naveen, are you okay? Are you ready today?
Yes, absolutely. I do, hold on right here with the background.
There you go.
Hey guys, how's it going? Super excited to be here.
Excellent. So a little bit of housekeeping. This is, I wouldn't say it's quite unfiltered, but this is straight talk, straight questions, straight answers. Do not hold back. And you can ask questions of our experts at the end. So do that. That's why we're here. So kick it off. Trend number one. We said we had 3 of them. Here's the first one, right? Hybrid casual, massive. It has emerged as a new style of mobile games, chalked up 5 billion downloads in 2022, according to data from Sensor Tower and Homa Games. That's the same year, by the way, that we saw hyper casual downloads dropped by 15%. So you've got that that's really out of sync, quite an imbalance. That downward spiral is continuing. So hybrid casual users are highly engaged, generally spend more than 3 minutes in sessions, and the mechanics, well, that means there's more sessions, more money, potential to really fuel growth. I'll start with you, Naveen, because you do this also very much at Homa, where you share your learnings with developers through Homa Academy. So you've tested a lot of game economies to find the ones that really boost LTV. What can you tell me about this? How to take advantage of this models, consistencies maybe that you've discovered?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crucial to have us all basically have like an understanding of, with this brand new genre of like hybrid casual, it's basically a combination, right? We take the space of like hyper casual, which has been an insane trend since the earlys. I mean, it's been a crazy trend for quite some time now, and we're trying to merge the best aspect of that. So as we all know, hyper casual games, in terms of the games itself, they're okay mechanics, but the key crucial part of them are going, across like their cost per install aspect. They're cheap in theory. We want to combine the best aspects of hyper casual and then take on, let's say, the gameplay of a casual game to build a stronger game, to build a game that retains longer. So it's important that we have to understand that we're actually trying to combine these two. And, basically, as you're saying, there's two crucial parts of it, right? How do we monetize our players? Because in the end, we have to have, we want to build a game that has an LTV which is high, but on top of that, player experience is so much more crucial. And this is where we're taking that aspect of the casual game. So basically, to answer your question, you don't really have an answer, unfortunately. And the idea is that you really need to understand your game itself. Every game is super different. The core loop is different as well, across like the audience as well. The audience, I would say, is actually the most impactful aspect of it. Here at Homa, we do a lot of time trying to have an understanding of our player base. So the audience comes crucial because if you have a game that is, across like, if the game has like a mechanic where it's geared across like the male side, you have to understand how those players, are basically engaging with the game. So as I like to say, there's no one answer. However, you can do things to really help you get there. The biggest, most impactful aspect of it is being able to run proper testing with your player basis, understanding what's going on in the game across like your data team, ideally. Here at Homa, we work super closely with our PM team across like the data team to fully understand what's happening in the game and understanding what's like the journey of the player so that we can make the right optimizations and do the right testing to help improve like our LTV. Now, this can be things as, basic as having a test across like ad pressure, or it could go as deep as doing testing across like the game economy. Now, the game economy part is very crucial because when you have a hybrid game, you ideally want to attract quite a bit of users. However, every user has a different, I guess you can say, across like the gameplay. You could have a core user who's super engaged with it, or you could have like a casual user who just plays, like a small amount. You want to be able to optimize for both these users. So what we really do and what really helps us here is being able to draw the learnings of the player journey. So understanding what are they doing in the game, how are they doing it, how come? Meaning that if the player is playing the game for 25 minutes, we want to understand basically every small detail of that player. Is he playing because he likes the game? Is he playing because it's like the game is, if the game is too easy, for example, and we want to understand that. And then we basically start to optimize our game with proper A/B testing. Then when you look at the side, across ad pressure and then also across like IEPs, that's obviously super crucial with the game because obviously to improve your LTV, you have to have both. Here, we actually approach it in a bit of a different way, I would say, where we don't actually even view ad pressure at the beginning. We just want to build a gameplay that is strong. Players are engaging with it. Then when we go with the game economy, we're testing, basically A/B testing the game economy with ad pressure. We want to understand is how is this actually having an impact on the player across the game. Hybrid games tend to have more impact across like RV ads. That's crucial because players then can basically have an opt-in to ads, but we have to understand when, what is the correct, as they're playing the game. RV ads are great because it can hand the player a boost. They watch an ad for half a minute or so, that player has a boost, for example. We want to find the exact time to give the player that boost to have them optimize. Then you have, the approach across like IEPs. IEPs are important. However, they should not impact what's happening in the gameplay. A player should be able to play the game and then opt into IEPs. And this is where we do quite a bit of testing, where we test basically like the timing of the IEPs. When is the point where we want to hand the player an IEP, where we can basically give them an IEP at the best point, because ideally you want to get them to buy an IEP when the game is fun. So kind of, just to highlight, unfortunately, there's no one right answer in really optimizing, but it's really crucial that you have a strong team on your data side. You're able to understand your data and A/B test. We A/B test from the beginning of a game to scale to pass scale. We're A/B testing nonstop every single day, every single hour of the day. And that's the most crucial part, I would say, to actually finding the right balance of the economy.
But to your point, it does really pay off, because what you're doing is you're getting more out of an existing game. You're finding new audiences. And we're talking about hybrid casual being a genre, right? But there are multiple genres in that genre. In fact, you at Homa, I was reading this, you have identified, I believe, 6 of them, idle games to puzzle games, multiplayer games. Maybe you, Jochen, because I'd like to ask about the meta layers, because they also translate into more opportunities for monetization. Where are you seeing or even implementing the most creative, the most innovative solutions? And do you have some examples to share?
Yeah, sure. So I found that super interesting what you just said, that, and because I also believe that you, for example, in Homa games, you have a big advantage in your testing capabilities, because that's where you come from, right? You test a lot of different gameplays, you test a lot of different approaches, but then the challenge will be, how can you make can you give purpose to the player? Because that's what's missing, like this long-term purpose, and that's where the meta layer of the games comes in. And there you lose a little bit of that advantage, because now it's not so fast-paced anymore, and it's a bit more investment needed to test, like, the long-term motivation of the players. So that's, I think, a really interesting development. And yeah, I mean, I've seen quite different meta layers being tried. I mean, one very common one is the renovation. So we see that in quite a bit of games, that you start with something broken and then you renovate it. Example would be, I mean, most of the Playrix games, right? They really put quite some effort on that. Other games, they bring in this build-up aspects that we also in our group have in a lot of games. Also, strategy games are quite big on the build-up. Then you see the progression maps, which give people some feeling of progress and some purpose. RPG features, so you have heroes, you can level them up, they become stronger. For me, like, I had some difficulties separating like hybrid casual from casual games, because at the end, what's the difference? And I settled for myself with that in hybrid casual, the core gameplay is still much simpler. It's like it's like easier to master, and it's more repetitive. So how can you actually with a more repetitive core gameplay give purpose to the players and make it a fun game, so you can add that monetization layers? And then leveling up that hero, leveling up the gear that hero has, or leveling up the map, that could be really interesting features. I think that qualify as some meta gameplay for these games. And yeah, just to add what's been said, I think having like the players engaged in a fun gameplay, that's the main challenge, because we know it's quite simple, or not simple, but it's easier to hook the player for like a mini game, right? But then giving them this 7-day, 30-day, 60, 90-day, 180-day, even longer purpose of playing a game that you then see with the core, mid-core games, that's a challenge here. And yeah, I'm really curious to see that development and what kind of games come out, because I also want to add that as someone that has a lot of more core games in his portfolio, we're quite happy about the hyper casual game sector, because at the end what they did is they opened up user acquisition and audiences for games in general. So because it's such a broad audience that you guys appeal to, that would have never looked into a more core or casual game. So I think that's now a really interesting development of transitioning or moving those audiences to, let's say, more engaging gameplays. So watching this trend, very excited. Yeah.
Well, you raised the question, maybe Faheem, you take that for a moment, because we're here in part because we have a hybrid casual game ebook as well, not to plug it, but you do define it and you do answer some of Jochen's questions. Maybe you just want to take that and explain to us a little bit about these games, what they are and what makes them revenue generating machines.
Sure thing. So I mean, everybody here is an expert, and that both Naveen and Jochen touched on as well, that, as the market is basically catching on to a new trend, hybrid casual is much more of a safer bet, right? So you would have a healthy share of audiences that would help you monetize with ads. At the same time, you would have this core niche user base that would go on and do those in-app purchases. So at the end of the day, when you track those day 30, 45 or 180-day LTVs, you would have a good mix of both the things as well. Even from a monetization perspective, it makes much more sense for these gaming studios to kind of, have a healthy mix, because if you are just on the casual side, as Jochen mentioned, right, after a certain day and time, you lose those players, right, because they don't have any motivation to get back to the game. At the same time, if it's all in-app purchases, once they reach a certain sweet spot, from there, the trend basically starts going downhill, right? But if you kind of, help them monetize with these rewarded placements, give them these boosts, these offers, limited time coin bases, right? These kind of things ensure that these users do come back and that sweet spot goes up from there. Hence, the whole hybrid casual ebook that we had come out with was something of an industry trend, and happy to see that the industry leaders feel the same vibe.
Indeed, you were talking about things blending. That's a good segue to you, Piyush, as well, because you're looking at monetization models over at Product Madness. Now, you don't perhaps look at it in the same way, but it is about that blending, the approach to in-game ads, in-game rewards. What makes the best use of the revenue potential of hybrid casual games? What can you share?
Look, I mean, I'll take it a bit at a very high level, right? I mean, just adding to what Jochen, Naveen, and Faheem said, right? Eventually, if you look what happened, what changed fundamentally from 2019 to now, right? Why is there a rise of hybrid casual? It's basically because of the change in privacy, basically. I mean, through the ATT changes that happened. That certainly forced hyper casual to sort of go down in terms of revenue, because there wasn't any more cheaper for us to get that, get those installs, and also not easier for us to get those CPMs as well in that world. Now, essentially what happens is in the pre-ATT world, we had a lot of user level data. We had a lot of third-party data to play around with, right? So we could always, based on a combination of third-party data and first-party data, we can always predict a user behavior to say that user is potentially going to do, ad monetization, or potentially going to get us more money through in-app, in-app purchase. What happened post ATT is a fundamental shift in that world, saying that, okay, you no longer have third-party data. Right. I mean, obviously, it becomes more of an opt-in, and similarly, something's going to happen on the Android side as well. So the more we enter into a world of less third-party data and more first-party data, where you have a control internally to say, what is the prediction of this user's behavior? Like this user, what is going to do? Is the user going to convert and give you more money through AdMon? Is the user going to go ahead and give you more money through in-app? That's the fundamental, sort of approach that hybrid casual had sort of started with. I would like to call it more of a data-oriented game development, right? Because every single game is obviously data-oriented, but I think the fluidity with which the core model of the game can change is very different in a hybrid casual as compared to something like my genre, which is social casino, right? Which is extremely different, another different layer of subgenre where it's a very different sort of more IAP-led games, right? And also just to add to what Jochen was saying, which is saying that you give them a purpose. The value of the purpose is just to increase the retention eventually. If you increase the retention, then you can make money through two of the models that are still there through hybrid casual, which is IAP and IAM. So eventually, I think that's a good blend. I do believe it's a more data-led, because you have to be able to predict the user behavior. You have to be able to predict when the user is churning. You have to be able to predict how the user behavior ultimately contributes to what kind of monetization the user can bring. And that's what's going to help.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, the data is also showing that, some of these players, we're seeing these player types again. Some resemble the whale types that we knew from hyper casual as well. Some people want to challenge. So you want to optimize the ad economy. So you're looking at player habits, you're matching player habits. Anyone have any player habits or metrics that they're watching in order to take advantage of this opportunity? Something to offer here in the way of advice or guidance?
Yeah, absolutely. A few things we kind of view as we're as we have a game, one main thing is understanding across like playtime, how long are they being engaged, right? If a player is staying engaged, that means there are, we can keep them engaged longer, and then we have a lot more of a chance to basically have them opt into, we could have them opt into there more. I think the other important thing is ads watched. Understanding if you have a hybrid game that's true hybrid, understanding if they're actually watching ads or not, right? Meaning that if you have a user that's engaging a lot with your RVs, which are opted into ads, right? You opt into watching an RV. Can that be a user you convert to an IEP, or do you keep that player, and you don't keep them as like an IEP buyer? That's super important, I think. And I think making sure. Apologies. All good. Yeah, so I think it's understanding ads watch is crucial, and I think it's really it adds a lot of value to us and helps us understand the player type. Are they going to be a more casual hybrid player and be more ad driven? Are they going to be a more player as a whale and actually buy IEPs? So I think those are two key ones that we tend to watch pretty closely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That brings up a really interesting point, which is the whole idea of what a toolbox looks like that can equip growth marketers here or in our audience, to understand and optimize UA spend and understand also attention paid, attention given to the ad mix. You need tools to do that. I'd like to maybe start with you, Faheem, understanding what is it that this toolbox needs to have?
That's a good one, Peggy. So with AppSamurai, we have been working with quite a few of these gaming studios out there. And as we kind of, work with them, especially on the hybrid casual genre, one thing that we do realize, something that Naveen did say, is kind of, how to ensure that they are still hooked on after a certain span of time. That playtime is quite crucial. An example of this is, let's say, an RPG game. Let's say, you need to reach a certain level of quests to reach a certain height in the game. Now, to reach that quest, what the whole setup does is kind of, usually the gaming studios don't have these events embedded, right? It's usually tracked by playtime. Now, if you have certain events or tokens defined for these deep in-app funnels, what on the user acquisition side you could do is with these rewarded setup, you could actually reward the user to reach a certain quest and complete the quest to gain a certain reward. The idea here is you give the user a more of an in-game gamification, let them leverage the rewarded mechanism. So from the UA partner, you use rewarded ads, they reach a certain level. Along the way, they're already going to watch these rewarded videos, in-app ads and banners. And if they reach the quest that's at level 50, for example, they basically unlock a new move. And that's how they're like, okay, now how about level 100? So step by step, kind of, you help them unlock this along the way as well. So these deep in-app events is something that is very, very crucial that often our partners do implement. And on the UA side, we kind of reward the users to reach a certain event inside the game as well. At the same time, these limited time offers, right? A good way to keep the user activated and hooked on is something where you basically reward the user for every action they take. Let's say an offer is going to live for 24 hours. Usually probably on Piyush side, on the casino side, you have these limited slot offers where you get extra coins, extra deposits, etc. So these kind of things enable the user to actually get back and basically continue playing the game as well. One thing that's very common that we have seen is basically cross-promoting your own game inside your other game. So let's say if you have two games under the same portfolio, both of them are hybrid casual. Along the way, when I'm playing game A, I would see a rewarded video that promotes your game B. So this is, I'm basically cross-promoting my own apps in their own ecosystem and retrieving that player as well.
Yeah, that matches a lot with what I'm hearing about cross promo making a different type of comeback, a different type of impact. Briefly, Naveen, because we started with you and there's so much at Homa Academy, I personally want to unpack it myself and take a look. But you have, because you've applied this to capitalize on the potential of this subgenre, done so much testing, maybe you can end with a little bit of a formula. There's not an answer, but a bit of a formula for hybrid casual, because you have a great case study as well, Fight for America. Would you walk us through that?
Absolutely. So this game is probably the coolest game in my opinion at Homa, not because of the gameplay itself, but more of the challenges we actually had to face. So I'll basically explain how this happened. So we actually were going to launch this game in last year at the end of the year. And we've been working on this game for 5-6 months, and we felt that the product KPIs were good. One of the main strengths of this game was the cost per install. We had a strong cost per install for this game out the gate. We actually began to go into a soft launch with this game. And within 2 weeks, we actually killed the scale. Being transparent, we decreased the scale pretty aggressively, actually, because we felt the KPIs weren't up to par. They weren't up to the potential we felt a true hybrid game was actually going to be. So we descaled the game, and we kind of went back and we're trying to understand why. So full credits here to our PM team, across like, here we got a lot of help across like our data team, but we really need to understand what was happening in the game to keep users in the game longer, to get them to watch ads, to get them to buy IEPs. So we have to basically understand why were they dropping off, right? And what we did was we did quite a bit of optimizations with the game events. So we implemented a tremendous amount of events to help understand every little detail of what the player is doing, what time they're playing, how they're playing, are they going to click the upgrade button or not? And what we were trying to understand was, what is this equation to making them play the game longer and keep them in the game for, just keep them more engaged in the game. And what we really saw was that we didn't have the right balance of economy, ads, IEP, and gameplay. So we went to a very aggressive approach with A/B testing. And we actually began with looking at the game economy, understanding how far a player was getting with the game economy, and seeing were there any points basically where the player had a drop off. Was the game basically being, was the game, was the player, I guess you can say, if the player, yes, there. And then what was interesting we saw was that when we started to increase the scale by doing a tremendous amount of A/B testing and driving a lot of optimizations for the economy, players retained tremendously longer because we just made the game more fun. And that's kind of, and that's a cool way of here, because we chose to make the player experience a bit more granular, but keep them engaged longer. And this allowed us to not only convert users more to, having them watch more RVs and IEPs, but also made the gameplay quite long. It gave them a lot more opportunity to be engaged. And the way we kind of approached this was we basically created like a bunch of rules in the game based where, depending on the player's actions, they had a different gameplay. Meaning, if you were watching more RVs, you had a change in the economy. If you were buying IEPs, you had a change in the gameplay, meaning that we wanted players to stay engaged, where if you bought an IEP, you would get all this extra bonus, new guns, and all this stuff. We made the game slightly harder, right? So that way it wasn't as easy to just keep going, and it created this, across like a mechanic to keep them engaged. And that was super crucial. And that actually what made the game, I think, super strong. And when we approach our hybrid games now, that's the approach we take. It goes back to the point of, one, understanding your players, understanding the why, the what, the how, the who, understanding what they're doing in your game, whether it's tracking events, tracking with their behaviors, and then optimizing towards that. What is an ideal player? And we have to have that answer. And we have to think, our ideal player is playing the game for X amount of days and has a playtime of Y, right? And we come up with those ideas. So at Homa, I think the one thing we do is that we've been creating a lot of these across like the playbooks and really taking all our past learnings from games. This way, when we do have, a game that's across the hybrid space, we have a tremendous amount of tests that we've already done in the past. And the last point I'll quickly highlight is that the biggest thing we like to say at Homa is that we're going to improve our games every single time. If you look at our hybrid games from last year versus this year, there's clear improvements with them. And it comes from all the tests that our team has run from those last games. So last year, we had a few hybrid games that were great games. They're super strong. They're still in the charts, which is great. But this year, we can see that our hybrid games have improved across all aspects, across retention, playtime, across LTV. And I think it's due to, one, us being able to give our teams, give basically everyone proper tests being run, creating because like a playbook, right? In theory, it's saying, here are the best learnings from hybrid we've had over the last 24 months, right? And it's a clear example. So yeah, it's been a super cool game, I think, and the team has done an amazing job with this one because of the ups and downs. This game went to scale. We killed it within a few weeks, spent another month. So kudos again to the team, and took this game back to scale basically like a month later. And I think it shows a great example of saying it's not always perfect. You really need to go back and get more granular to understand what's actually happening, improve it, understand how you can make the game more fun. And I do want to highlight that last point, is making the game fun was probably the most impactful part of it. The game potentially was just not super fun. And now we added gameplay elements to keep users engaged because it was cooler. You felt like you wanted to keep playing it and have the upgrades basically.
That's a great story. I'm thinking about all the learnings there, and there are so many, but they do go a little bit even back to Jochen's point about purpose, right? You're almost like making the ideal game for the ideal audience, and they have a sense of agency in this. The behavior determines the gameplay. we have a couple more trends, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to the next trend. Another mega trend is mini games, and a little bit of a play on words, but it's got nothing to do with the size, because this is something that we've seen a slew of them, right? We've got Playrix, Township, Fun Plus, Stormshot. All of them have mini games, which is basically their own gameplay in an existing core loop. But the question is, great, they're popular. Are they a golden ticket? Well, yeah, they can encourage users to spend more time, but a little bit of a show of hands, a question to all of us, just throwing it out there. You know, do they actually encourage users to play more and increase advertising revenue? Just wondering, just a show of hands out here, and maybe on top of that, experimenting with mini games. I mean, Jochen, you are someone seeing this experimentation. Tell us, you know, first of all, like, what are the experiments?
Yeah, I think it's perfect transition, because for me, it's just like the same topic we just discussed with the hybrid casual, but
Different
from
twist.
the other side, right? So
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, we've and probably everybody has seen like all these ads, Stormshot, Evony, for example, or you already mentioned Playrix with Township, where you have to collect something, and it used to be this fake advertising like a few years ago, right? And like it's a game like the ads, and even people were making fun about it. And now we found it's also quite interesting that game developers, they took this opportunity, and now they integrate basically the ads that work quite well into their game. And yeah, and that's more from the more core, from the mid-core, more from the casual side. I see this happening quite a bit. And so maybe we meet at the end at the hybrid casual. I'm not sure. Yeah, and we also like see this because same what happened to the hyper casual, that the advertising became more challenging for everybody else. It became also more expensive. So everybody's trying to, you know, get the early user acquisition funnel more broader, get the impressions up, and lower the CPI. And maybe that's not so easy to address like a broader audience with your hardcore true gameplay. So maybe that's easier with some mini game then, and you start experimenting with that. And then we experiment from the other side, basically also in our group, because what we don't want is, again, to go in this, yeah, that's not the original game. That's something that is like deceptive, doesn't fit the gameplay. So here the challenge is for me from the other side. How do you, like, you know, condense some gameplay elements into something that's really interesting for the user, and then you can use that for advertising, and then you bring in more people, a bigger audience that actually likes your game. So I think there's a big benefit for that, and experimentation happens in the same way, that you brainstorm different ideas. What are like, you have to understand your audience. Just repeat what was said before, right? You have to understand your audience. What is their motivation to play your core game? And then you think about, okay, how can I address the same motivation with something much more simple, something that they would also enjoy? And then you add that as an experiment to your main game, probably early in the funnel, or also early in the user onboarding, to test how people are, do they like that, right? And the funny thing is that I find it myself most of the time really a good addition to the core gameplay. So because we come from a time when you had these long waiting times in games, especially for the core games, for strategy games, and maybe that's not modern anymore. Like in times of fast-paced social networks that are growing really crazy, people are not willing to wait, 10 minutes, 20 minutes until they can do something. So we give them, with adding more content to the games, we also give them something to do, and that also helps the retention. So I think it's something that is not only good for the user acquisition side, but if you do, like as said, if you add the right mini game to the hardcore or to the core game, then you also add really relevant content for your players, which make the game even better and even more enjoyable for them. And if you can do that, of course, that's perfect, because you have a complete win-win situation. And that's also what I see, like companies experimenting and testing yeah, at the moment.
And you also said how you're experimenting as well. Wondering about the innovation here, because we just established through you, Naveen, you know, we understand the models that will work in hybrid casual. What about the monetization methods that work here in mini games? Maybe Naveen or Faheem, you want to take that, because ads, IAPs, something more, a different mix. What works here to get the best balance of monetization and player experience?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want me to hop in here, I think it's important to understand what the core game is, right? So if we're adding these smaller games in between, what's like the objective? As with, you know, when you look at these like smaller games, right, a lot of them are basically hyper casual games from the early days. And I think what's important to understand is that how those actually have an impact, because the hyper casual genre is meant for everyone, right? The idea is that you can appeal to a mass audience by implementing these type of game mechanics into your core gameplay. It's ideally hoping you could increase like your audience base in theory, right? Because one, you can advertise to more people, but two, you can hopefully find people that are not, let's say, part of your core gameplay mechanic, but are interested in that more smaller game mechanic and keep them into play. Now, in theory, what this should do is improve your playtime, right? Ideally, players are engaging more. Now, depending on the main game's way of like how we're going to monetize, getting more playtime can lead to players having an IEP, right? Or if the game is more, you know, across like ad driven, it gives you more chances to push ads, as an example. You know, they could be an RV option, maybe in that smaller gameplay. So I think the two main points here to highlight are that these smaller games tend to be, you know, take a lot of gameplay learnings from old hyper casual games from the 2018 days, where everyone knows these mechanics. So it's a way to keep users engaged super easily because people know how to tap and draw, for example. But then the key part too of that is that it improves playtime, so it keeps them engaged in your core game, in your, you know, across the game itself. And that's crucial, because if you can keep a player hooked, you can then keep them engaged. And then in theory, improve, improve through ads, or ideally like an IEP offering to keep them. But the idea is that you keep them in longer, right? So it's a way that you're bringing in a new audience, or an audience that could not be, you know, more of a core gameplay, but they come in because of that smaller game mechanic.
Yeah, and they stay hooked, to your point. Faheem, are you going to add something?
Yeah, just what Naveen mentioned, right? So one thing that was kind of was a hot topic in recent years was the whole playable ads as a format. That's a format that kind of, it does stick well. It's still in demand, but something that was kind of, very, very intuitive, especially if you are somebody that's giving out an ad, and if you have the idea where a user before downloading your game could play a small snippet of the game, and you make them hooked to that small snippet, chance of them converting and reaching that small hook piece of a game are much more higher. So that was something that was very, very interesting as well. At the same time, coming back to the playtime, so rewarded playtime, or the play to earn mechanism, is something that is very much in demand these days. Again, these kind of player base always tend to have higher in-app purchases. So all of AppSamurai customers that are on the higher in-app purchase side of things tend to go with our rewarded playtime campaign model, where you have the aspect of rewarding the user for every minute that they spend inside your game. So the more they play your game, the more they earn, which can be turned into cash rewards. And from your side, they're already kind of getting those in-app boosts, in-app rewards. So the user actually wins twice in the span of the same time. That is something that we have seen the economic shift to, where the rewarded playtime concept is kind of adding significant value for advertisers that are more oriented towards in-app purchases.
Mm-hmm. It's really about rewarding for every interaction. That's what I'm hearing here. But there's also the element of content. Content has to keep me hooked, and that requires a lot of creativity and focus. And Piyush, this is what you do in social casino games, because you're extracting a ton of value from amazing IP, like Dune, for example, right? So drawing from that, because you're not in necessarily looking at mini games, but what's your advice to help marketers take advantage of the opportunities that you see in a growing market for mini games? Because we all agree it's coming, it's happening, and it's gaining traction.
Look, whoever came up with the idea of mini game has to be a marketing guy. I would say it cannot be it cannot be a product person. No, but jokes about, to be very honest, I mean, as everybody mentioned, right? At the end of the day, what happened over here? Like, you want to enhance or expand the audience base without affecting the core game. Essentially, that is what mini game is, right? Mm-hmm. But I'll adding to what everybody else said, but I just add one shadow of a doubt over there, which is if the marketing team is not aware and is not able to target your core audience and your expanded audience at the same time, then it becomes a problem. Because what happens if marketing tends to get away from your core audience and it starts targeting your enhanced audience through mini games, then you're losing out on your core audience. And that's a big risk. I've seen that happen in one of the games, that I know about. So I'm just saying, like, you do everything. Like, mini games are fantastic. It's an extension of playable ads. Playable ads had their own issues with morality of it and ethics of it, to be very honest, as Players was mentioned. But ultimately, it boils down to creating that kind of mini games to improve retention, but not at the cost of the core users. Going back to what you said on the Dune about the Dune IP, like, ultimately, look, why everybody's trying to expand their audience base? There are two reasons for it. Obviously, one, the privacy changes that happen. Cannot forget that. It's just it fundamentally changed the industry. But the second, also at the same time, is I believe there's increased competition for every single subgenre, right? If there is an increased competition, you only have two ways to sort of cater to the new audience. One, obviously, through mini games, through creating a stereotype of game that can sort of be more engaging, more fun, just for a casual, hyper casual kind of a sector. The second is obviously creating something brand or IP related, right? Now, the IP game, obviously, for example, that what we did, which is the Dune one. But for us, it mainly targeted the audience for who were returning back to the game. It was not targeted for users who are playing the game for the first time, because it was a game that was created using the Dune IP, right? So those are the two ways, obviously. One is through mini games. The other is obviously through creating IP-led branding that can potentially help your brand stand out, and then your users can potentially come back to your game.
Mm-hmm. So we're calling it a growing market. I just wonder, a show of hands or a thought here, is this a trend? We're calling it one of the top trends. Does it ultimately lack staying power, or does it have staying power? Just curious. We're going to weigh in on that.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to
definite.
I would directly address what Piyush said, because I think it's not necessarily the marketing team only. Because if you look at the market, consumers also, they tend to ask for more these days, right? And even if you look at AAA games, there's like more than one game mode, or there's different ways to play a game, or I don't know, just games develop, like more game modes, more content is added all of the time. And I have the feeling that people are also looking for that. And there's not only one way to play a game, but there's 2 ways or 3 ways. And what you said, like, depending on what choices you make in the game, then maybe the game behaves different. And I think adding this, like, content, like snacks or small items to the games can be really, really good also for from the product side itself, and make the game experience much more richer, right? So
no, I agree with you, Johan. There's no question about it. The only thing that I add over there is, from a marketing standpoint, people should not, the UA manager should not move away from the core audience targeting, because it sometimes you become, because if the mini games are giving you cheaper CPA, you tend to go to that direction, right? But ultimately, your core game has to speak for itself. So that's the only distinction that I would like to sort of add.
Yeah, there we agree 100%. Yeah, I think it's going to stay. Yeah.
Just curious, Jochen, while we have you, because we're talking about the benefits and you're experimenting with it, could you give me a range? Is it the uplift in retention, or what makes this worthwhile? Because it is an experiment, takes effort. What's the payoff?
I mean, I'm more from the marketing side. So for us, definitely is like on the broader audience and the lower user acquisition costs.
Okay, so the lower UA costs, which is even better in some ways. Again, just a range before we continue, just so people understand that it has a dividend, it has a benefit.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, everybody who's running marketing campaigns knows that if you show like true in-game, you would see like a lower interest in the ad itself, but then the conversion rate, of course, is much higher, because you're really on that core audience, as we just heard. Yeah. But then if you go a little bit away from the core gameplay and you show different aspects of the game, which are maybe more mass appeal. So we have, for example, we have a farm game, which is about really a farm economy simulation, and you have to build up your farm, collect, harvest, and then you start producing like goods and sell them. But part of that game is also like a little tractor game where you can drive around and collect some stuff and just deliver it. And it's on game, right? It's the same like kind of setting, and people like it. And we can use that in marketing and attract a bit of a different audience. And we try to connect that, as just to close the loop here, by also making it about setting up a production chain, by optimizing some kind of, and you can sell, so that we try to attract the same kind of users who would also like to play the core game that the game originally came from, so that it's not completely off topic and something that doesn't fit at all, but it goes a little bit in the funny short-term, you drive your tractor around direction. It's not like a build-up game, right? But it tends to bring the same kind of users, and that's what I mean, right? So that, and then even our old players who play the game for 5-6 years, they start enjoying these mini games, right? And then start racing around with a little tractor. So and then you have a win-win situation, because it gives us in marketing the opportunity to attract new audiences and for lower CPI, because not everybody wants to play a simulation game. But then these people that come in, a good share of them, they really enjoy the simulation game and would have not looked into that themselves. So, and that's, I think, the marketeer challenge here, to not come up with anything that just clicks well, but to come up with something that really resonates with your core audience. And there's a lot of experimentation needed. That's what we talked about, right? And understanding the audience and testing again. And it's again, it's this balance of the reach that you get with your ads, and then the retention that you see in your game, and then how that users engage in the long term with your core game, right? And you try to balance that out.
Of course, big benefit, you get more out of your core game. You get more out of your existing game. Last and final trend, which I'm just going to touch upon briefly because it's still happening. So we can't really talk about how it's going to turn out, but we can discuss the impact and where marketers need to be braver or bolder in their approach. And that is AI, right? The word, the buzzword, the trend. And I was looking back, and 5 years ago, I wrote on Forbes, there could be no UA without AI. I looked at that and thought, oh, that's pretty cool. Very good sort of motto, easy to put on a t-shirt. I have to ask you, here we are 5 years later. Was I right? No UA without AI.
You were right.
I was right. Okay, there we go.
No, but just adding to that, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty early. I mean, AI has been existing for a while. It's not like it's something that came out, but obviously it became more palatable to users with this year. That's a fundamental change that happened.
Yeah.
But right now, most of the AI innovation is happening in the space of creative, right? And the creative production and creative analysis and stuff like that. I think those are the two areas that are getting sort of maximum input from a marketing standpoint. But eventually, in the next couple of years, I do believe if and only if the partners would be able to open up a bit more, then there is a potential to be automated across the board for any UA managers to work on. Right now, it's very creative specific because creative is something that can be transitioned across different partners and stuff like that. But for any automation in the marketing space to work eventually at a very high level through AI, it's the partners who have to become more fluid with their access control and stuff like that. So that's something that I think will eventually reach in that place. But yeah, Peggy, to your point, you were right, and hopefully in the next 2-3 years we see a different trend.
Yeah, because I have heard marketers speak about that this could be amazing for live ops, bringing creativity, but also effectiveness, efficiencies to live ops. I told you at the top, I spoke about us trying to be braver and bolder in our approaches to harnessing this. Now, you point out, Piyush, that one thing we're waiting for is maybe everyone to be on the same page, but can improve a number of things, including UA. So maybe, Faheem, you take that question, looking at it from your perspective, where marketers can be bolder, perhaps right now, even in harnessing AI to improve UA.
Yeah, Peggy, one thing that Piyush mentioned was kind of, everyone needs to evolve with this. So an aspect of creative production, it's very seamless. But a lot of times when these creatives are passed on to partners, that's where the whole manual process comes into play again. So as a partner, as AppSamurai has been in the UA space of things, a lot of it to do with AI optimization, right? A lot of automated optimization where you have certain fraud parameters, certain optimization alarms, etc. If the partners are able to kind of, filter out the fraud, filter out these bad performing sources from a marketer's perspective on the gaming side, side, it makes life much more easier for them as they have less data to skim through. All the data they have to skim through can be automated with an AI, but at least on what is being bought on a certain inventory is at least assured when you have these kind of AI scales as well. One thing that AppSamurai has been a bold advocate for the past 5 years is the whole rewarded engaged user acquisition side of things. In the initial days, 5 years ago, not many marketers were open to testing out these kind of inventories, but as the trend caught on, more and more game advertisers, and these days over 40 plus different game studios we work with, are on the rewarded side of acquisition, because it's a very simple model. You incentivize, you motivate the user to actually involve and engage with your app. And with each passing day, with these hybrid casual and rewarded ads and playable ads, it's all about rewards, right? So that's why kind of certain marketers are still trying their best to kind of, accept the fact that they might have to move to the rewarded world, but then there's still a portion of ones that have already gone onto that side. And with these, because at the end of the day, every marketer wants a higher LTV, positive return on the ad spend, etc. And with this reward mechanism, it does make life a bit more easier for everyone. And towards the end of the day, it's all a ROAS positive world where we are all happy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We've covered a lot of ground here, 3 trends, maybe a little bit of record time, who knows? I'm just going to encourage everyone. I see some questions in the Q&A, just use the chat. That's what it's there for. Nothing is off limits. And maybe Faheem, you want to I had the first word, you take the closing word and bring us all back together on a question that we can all weigh in on, maybe even me. Go ahead.
Sure thing. Before that, we do have a question from the audience.
Okay.
They like the insights we shared in the webinar. One thing they want to ask is to the gaming studios on how is the privacy issue affecting it, especially with the Apple IDFA and upcoming restrictions. Is it kind of posing any barriers when a gaming studio is trying to move a shift from casual to hyper casual, or trying to change their in-app monetization methods? Anyone wants to take it?
Oh, I think it's a good one for Piyush personally.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think again, I don't belong to hyper casual, so mine would be from more of a social casino space. But yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think there are, if you're smarter about your approach to privacy changes that are happening, and if you've been tracking it all along, I do believe the marketing mix should not evolve that like crazily, because at the end of the day, you're like, if I segregate this question into 2, iOS and Android, apart from Facebook, everywhere else, you're still receiving the user level data. So there's nothing that has fundamentally changed over there. You're still having the same media mix, same sort of data, same D7 ROAS, same optimization. So that's still there. That would change with Privacy Sandbox in the middle of next year, but for now, we are okay. On the iOS side, if I split this into scan and non-scan, right? I mean, at the end of the day, scan right now, to be fair to them, we all criticized when they started. But right now, they are at least listening to some of the feedbacks that we have provided as an industry, right? So they are sort of changing a bit. And I like the idea of having day two sort of a data points that you're already receiving. Now, if you have enough data, and if you're smarter about this, you have opt-in data from limited set of users. You have probabilistic data for non-SRNs, and you have scan data. If you're smarter about this, you can potentially crack the code of actually reaching a D7 ROAS, or from a UA standpoint, or actually able to understand what is the value that you're going to generate from IAM or IAP as well, because you can put the IAM behavior or the retention events as part of the conversion schema. So eventually, if you have a combination of things that you can sort of use, and obviously some approximation that you have to take to eventually reach to a conclusion. So what I'll say is, obviously, I mean, historically the answer would have been yes. There are a lot of issues in there. It's been pretty bad. But in short, I would like to say that we have to move past the world where we are sort of not aware of what the changes are happening. Be aware of the changes. Have limited data, but try and enhance the data from whatever little options that you have, and then reach to a final conclusion. I do believe it can be done.
Naveen, do you have something to add from the view of what you do in practice, or even at the academy? I'm sure you have a lot of meetings there.
Absolutely. I guess the one main thing is, if we're looking at like hyper casual, the goal is to have like a mass audience, right? Where scan might not be as crucial, because we're not looking to find, quality users at like a more granular viewpoint. We're trying to appeal to like 100 million people. So the approach is slightly different. For hybrid though, we are looking to hopefully find a bit more higher quality users through, campaign types. But I think the other part is also how the ad networks have like reacted, right? Apple is still passing information back through scan. Yes, it's on like a delay, a day or two, right? But you can use your models internally to help project out that CPI, help understand the quality of users. And that's the big thing, right? Being able to work across like your data team. At Homa, we have internal dashboards for scan that we use that update every single day, and we're able to understand data pretty accurately. And so it's good that we haven't seen the full switch as of right now, where I think when this first came out, everyone was a bit scared of what's actually going to happen. It could happen anytime, sure. But I think the big thing here is understanding, one, who's your audience again? Like if you're hyper casual, it's broad. Like a lot of times you're trying to appeal at basically everyone, but then also from a more, let's say, casual or even a hybrid casual approach, how can you build the correct across like the dashboards to understand the scan data to help you create the right basically what we have is creating across like a model to help us understand what's that LTV after X amount of days once we have a small amount of data. So we're taking the small amount of that we actually have and then creating like a model out of it, and we're constantly trying to improve it. So I don't view it as this is like the end by any means. In fact, it just means that I believe it just means that everyone has to get better, which is good in my opinion. So yeah.
Love to have the model, but that's probably all yours.
And just before we wrap up, we have 5 more minutes. So if everybody can kind of, give in their one pointer, it could be regarding, what bets would you place? It could be a trend. It could be about monetization, about the, how to effectively get the most value out of your paid spend, but like, like a small one-liner to leave the audience with. You can start with Peggy if you like.
Me? Oh
Yeah.
my. Okay. Okay, I'll start with one. I was interviewing someone recently. I interview hundreds of marketers with my job across my podcasts and my projects. And I was talking to a gaming marketer, and he was telling me about the role of onboarding and how he was getting a lot of money out of people, monetizing his game rather. And it was also making certain that the ads were more educational and telling people about more features in the game. And I thought that was very interesting and a very easy shortcut, because you want to educate people to use your game more. It makes total sense. Educate them to use the game more in the ads, and then they will become more involved and engaged. Granted, it was mid-core, but I think there's lessons there for everyone.
Thank you for that. Piyush?
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, like, I don't want to listen back to this one, by the way, if I'm wrong, but in case it turns out to be right, with the privacy sandbox things and with the scan thing that has happened, like, I think one thing potentially I believe would happen is there would be more formats and more innovation being done in the creative space, especially with the advent of AI as well. So it's a combination of all three. It's not just one. And what I'm trying to say with that is the users and their behavior and their response to ads that have not fundamentally changed. Their attribution and the reporting have changed. So we should not get lost in the world of saying, okay, the targeting has become difficult. Obviously, there's less user level data, but at the end of the day, the users would respond to creative if served well. So I do believe there would be a more structured and nuanced approach to creative by UA managers in the next 2-3 years, especially with the advent of AI as well. And the second thing from my side that I keep on saying, and every single time I've spoken to Peggy about this as well, which is I do believe games would start investing a lot more into brand advertising. I don't think the world of performance advertising alone would help them in the future, where there's going to be a lot more competition. So yeah.
Right, perfect. Naveen?
Yeah, I would say the main thing here is, we had conversations across AI. AI is here to stay. You need to understand how it can have direct impact with the team, with, across like the industry. If you can take advantage of AI, you can move faster and quicker. So the one-liner is AI is here to stay. Find ways to implement it in your business.
And finally, Jochen.
Yeah, 2 of my points already taken. So I go with like understand your audiences. So we covered that like today as well. And I think product marketing is really having a big comeback in mobile gaming space the last 2 years. It's partly driven by the data privacy changes, that you cannot just throw ads at the wall anymore and see what sticks, but you have to understand who you are addressing and how you talk to them. So understanding your audience is quite important. And then enriching your gameplay is also the key, is understanding your audience, as we covered nicely today. So that would be my one line.
All right, perfect. And seems we are right on time with just 2 minutes to spare. So this would be the perfect opportunity to wrap this up. I would like to thank all the people in attendance that came out for this webinar and all the panelists as well. You will get an email that will have give you the option to watch this on demand, and you will have a nice blog that summarizes all the points that Naveen, Jochen, and Piyush, along with Peggy, mentioned out to you. And it will also have links where you can contact all of these people. So if you need anything else, just wait for the email, and we appreciate your time. So until next time, thank you for joining us at AppSamurai. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.